Top prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald is stepping down, and gambling is once again in the cards at the state legislature. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernard Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. I've got a couple of guys who know so much more than me that this will be a pleasure today. Mike Lawrence is back. He is the former director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. Now a resident of the Springfield area again, and a longtime State House reporter and press secretary to Governor Edgar before that. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you.
Charlie Wheeler is here, director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program, University of Illinois Springfield, teaching great young minds how to do this job, and also a longtime Sun-Times reporter before that at the State House. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you, Bernie. It's always good to be here.
Yeah, Patrick Fitzgerald. There's a lot of people talking about Elliot Ness and the Untouchables as Patrick Fitzgerald, after I think it's 11 years, announced just this last week that he is stepping down as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, having led the prosecution teams that sent to prison George Ryan, Rod Blagojevich, Conrad Black of Sun-Times fame, ownership. I don't know if you were happy or sad about that, Charlie. What does it mean? What does his era mean, and what do we look forward to now? Charlie?
Go ahead.
Well, it occurs to me that he was a tireless fighter for public integrity, and he was totally nonpartisan. As you mentioned, he sent George Ryan to prison, a Republican. He sent Rod Blagojevich to prison, a Democrat. He prosecuted people who were close to Mayor Daley in his patronage operation, put them away, put away a former Chicago city clerk. And he also was active in prosecuting mobsters. So he was, I guess the Elliot Ness image is probably fitting. And thinking about it, he was backed for that position by Peter Fitzgerald, a one-term U.S. Senator, no relative. And I think of all the stuff that Peter Fitzgerald has done in his entire public or private career, probably the thing of which he should be most proud is making Patrick Fitzgerald or backing Patrick Fitzgerald to be the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District.
And he brought him in from out of state, which was...
From New York, yeah.
Which was not...
Well, and there was a lot of consternation among the, quote, establishment. We're not so sure we want some outside guy. There was some suspicion that he might rock the boat. Well, he really did rock the boat in a lot of good ways.
Mike?
Well, I agree with everything Charlie said, and your point about coming in from out of state. To me, the only thing I would add is he had a real commitment to public service, and he referred to that again today. He said he's not sure what he's going to do in the future, but he said, I really love public service.
I wonder, it's interesting because Jim Thompson, our longest serving governor, 14 years, was a U.S. federal prosecutor in the Northern District of Illinois before that. I think most people look at Patrick Fitzgerald the way he is. He's going to be a politician. He doesn't even seem like he's going to be a defense attorney, which others in that job have gone on to, including Webb, Dan Webb, and Anton Valukas. In fact, Dan Webb, of course, is the lawyer for Bill Cellini of Springfield, who is one of the later people on the list who have been convicted under the leadership of
and
Patrick
Jim
Fitzgerald.
Thompson was a lawyer for George Ryan.
That's right. So, yeah, that's right.
I think the one thing, though, that Fitzgerald said pretty clearly, he said it throughout his time, and I think he said it again at kind of his farewell news conference, I'm not going to be running for public office.
So what do we think he's going to do?
Well, I think he's a different breed. Because when Jim Thompson was U.S. Attorney, at least in his last years, or the last part of his U.S. Attorney's role, it was clear he wanted to run for public office, and we've had several U.S. attorneys Jim Burns was U.S. Attorney
and ran for governor.
Otto Kerner was a U.S. Attorney. So
who Jim Thompson ended up convicting,
and
putting in jail.
So there, there's kind of been a line of them, but I don't see that in Fitzgerald. He quipped, "Can you really see me as a defense attorney?"
Right.
So I think this guy is motivated by things other than going out and making a lot of money or running for public office.
Right,
and it's going to be interesting. Now, he had been mentioned for the FBI job, it's not vacant right now, but people think it could be vacant. So he probably has some options in the public sector, maybe in academia. We had him down at SIU at the Simon Institute while I was still there, and he did a marvelous job with the students while he was there, and he told me he really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, well, there's some indication that he and his young family, because he got married during and had, I think, a couple of kids during the time that he had this job, that he wants to stay in Illinois. But other people have mentioned Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, catches occasional heat, and that this might be someone President Obama would replace him with. That would, of course, probably mean a move to Washington, but and it's the kind of job he clearly would consider.
I would think so.
But we obviously don't know where that's going, but it will be interesting. The other part of this situation is now it turns again to the senators from Illinois, in particular the senior senator of the president's party, which is Dick Durbin of Springfield, to figure out who to recommend to the president for the next go-round. And there's already, the Chatter particular columnist in one of the Chicago papers, John Cass, the Tribune, the Combine, saying, will Illinois politicians try to get somebody that they're more comfortable with who might be a safer prosecutor for them, or will they go outside again? And I guess we don't know exactly how that's going to, but it's pressure on Durbin, is it not? Yeah,
and the other thing that I would say about that is that no matter who the choice is, he's going to have huge shoes to fill, and it's going to be nigh unto impossible for someone to come in and make the kind of impact that Fitzgerald did, at least right off the bat. I mean, for one thing, you don't have a target like Rod Blagojevich, who's kind of a walking felony waiting to be indicted.
All they had to do was tap a few phones, and they got more than they expected.
Yeah, in a couple of months.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Well, one complication here is we got an election in November, and if Senator Durbin puts forth a nominee, I think there might be a question on confirmation. Even if Senator Kirk agrees to the choice, Republicans in the Senate might not be too eager to confirm the point.
Anybody for President Obama at this point.
So I think there's at least a possibility, maybe even a strong possibility of an interim appointment until after the election's over.
Yeah, I think that's the most likely thing, too.
Yeah.
Well, we will see how that goes. Senator Durbin himself is not up for election until 2014, I think, if he will go for a third term. We'll find out. So we'll see where it goes. And in general, he has had a situation where he has formed a committee of people who help him come to a recommendation. So I'm expecting he'll do that again. But
yeah, and it's for the U.S. attorneys in the districts of Illinois. It's also for federal judges that he consults outside people.
I mentioned gambling as we got into the show. The legislature is in the famous last few days, assuming that they can finish by March 31st before May 31st.
Right.
I do that in print now and then too. Before May 31st.
It'd be nice.
This is just next week. That's right. The fiscal year doesn't end until the end of June, but after May 31st, they need an extraordinary majority to pass any legislation that will take effect for the new year, so that gives the Republicans power, which the Democrats may not want to give them. But gambling is an interesting, continuing subject to come up in Illinois. We obviously, have gone just in the last 30 years from a few scratch-off tickets to casinos in various places. Now there's a big bill that just passed the House saying 5 more casinos, including one in Chicago, one in Danville, I know, I think the Rockford area.
South suburbs and
then
Lake County,
and
Park City.
Okay, and in addition to that, slots at racetracks, slot machines at racetracks, while Governor Quinn says, even before they acted on it, I don't want slots at racetracks, we don't want racinos, and when the bill came out, he actually used Patrick Fitzgerald saying there aren't enough safeguards against ethical problems that come from all the moneyed interests involved in casinos. So where will this issue go if we have any predictions at this point? Charlie, have at it.
I was going to say, it occurs to me that the bill passed the House with 69 votes, and Quinn has threatened a veto. To override a veto requires 71. The sponsor of the bill in the House says that he thinks that he has enough votes to override, and news reports mention that at one point on the electronic monitoring, the big roll call up on the wall that has lights light up, there were 71 green lights lit up. But at the last minute, a couple of people jumped off. There were other people who weren't there. So the thought is that the votes might be there to override a Quinn veto if that occurs. The problem that I would see with Quinn vetoing the bill is that we are in really tough financial times, and we're talking about making changes to the Medicaid program that will be life-threatening to some low-income people, or that will wind up costing us an awful lot more when we do away with certain home-based services and wind up with someone in intensive care in the hospital. And so the fact that this will bring in tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on an annual basis, plus maybe $1 billion when you auction off these new licenses, money that could be devoted in terms of the annual revenue to mitigate some of these cuts in Medicaid, some of the cuts that the legislature is considering to education, and in the case of the license money, money that could be used to pay off the backlog of bills. I think that's something that Quinn's going to have to think about long and hard. And particularly if he looks out there and he counts, you know, there are 71 votes in the House, there are 36 in the Senate to override my veto. My advice to him would be to say, okay, I didn't get everything I want, but the name of the game is you have to compromise. There have been changes made to address some of my concerns. There's not going to be slot machines at the racetracks to spoil the family festival.
Or you mean at the state fair?
Or at the state fair, yeah, to spoil the family atmosphere of the people walking around drunk eating corn dogs. And so
they're supposed to stay in the beer tents, Charlie.
Right, and we've both been there too at the fair. So, and Mike too. So
okay,
I think there's enough.
Too.
I think there's enough room that Quinn can make a graceful pirouette and accept it, particularly given the state's financial needs.
Yeah, Mike, how far beyond the old arguments that gambling has the social cost are we, or are we? There is still that concern, is there not, about the wrong people will gamble their money away.
Yeah, there is that concern, but my sense is the same as Charlie's. I think the train is on the track. Now, we've seen gambling trains derailed before, but I think we're probably going to see something pass. And even though Governor Quinn's rhetoric has been pretty negative, as you indicate, Bernie, the fact is that he seems to have left room for some of the negotiating that Charlie's talking about. For example, he's mentioned having a ban on campaign contributions from gaming interests. Now, I think those kind of bans are pretty ineffective and don't work well. We've had them before in Illinois on the horse racing industry and the insurance industry, for example. But that might be the kind of thing where supporters of a gaming package will say, well, if that's something you want, we can talk about it. Or he has called, and I think appropriately so, for tighter regulation of gambling in Illinois. And I think that's something the proponents could agree to. So he could come away, as Charlie indicated, with a package where he can say, I did make a difference. I'm not in love with gambling, but he could end up signing it. And I think the lure of the additional revenue is pretty strong.
Yeah, I find it interesting too that as all this is going on, the ongoing state construction program that was passed a couple years ago and is still being funded, part of the funding package was allowing video poker machines and that kind of thing in bars all across the state if they would just get the license to do so. And that's not even online yet, but it is still in the process of coming online, so that, well, not that bars and restaurants necessarily are, those would be family atmosphere, but you're going to have a lot more gambling anyway under something Quinn has already agreed to.
Well, and he's also the governor who signed the legislation to allow lottery sales over the internet. So,
which is, are we the only state that's doing that?
I think we are.
I
yeah.
think we are.
Well, one of the things I would caution here is that the legislators and the governor not spend all of this revenue bonanza until we see that it actually arrives. I do think, or I should say I agree with some of the opponents of gambling who say there is a saturation point, and
yeah, and one casino will take, you know, business away from another.
Right,
Clearly.
or one form of gambling will take money away from the other. I think there's going to be additional revenue, but I would hate to see expenditures committed based on some of the more optimistic revenues. And if that happened, it wouldn't be the first time in Illinois. That's part of the way we got into the trouble we're in today.
That's right.
Well, and in fact, that's one of the arguments that's made on behalf of the bill, is that it will cannibalize other casinos, except the one in Lake County will stop people from going into Wisconsin and gambling at the Indian casinos. Danville will stop people from going to Indiana. South suburbs will stop people from going to the Gary area, Hammond and Merrillville.
Yeah, keep the dollars in Illinois.
Keep the dollars in Illinois, yeah.
And Bill Black, former legislator from Danville, has been lobbying for this bill, and I think I don't know how much of a situation that is. I've heard him in some radio interviews, and I'm just wondering if he helped get this through this time, just because I think people hold him in high regard, even though he has, you know, finally retired from the legislature. Just one of those interesting revolving door things.
I would say that it certainly doesn't hurt, because he is a guy who is very well respected. In the years that I covered him, I thought he was a very serious legislator. He could be very emotional, but that was part of his job as the floor leader, to get up and rant and rave.
He would yell.
But he was a guy of integrity, and he was a guy who really fought for his constituents.
And Danville has been seeking to have a casino there for a number of years.
Yeah.
When we talk about saving business from going across the border, that's an argument that some people make against, and I'll move into the Medicaid situation, because one of the things the governor wants is a $1 a pack increase in the state tax on cigarettes, which would help Medicaid, because that amount of money, I think it is 300 and some million, would be doubled because it would be matched by federal dollars to benefit the Medicaid program. And I know while many Republicans say we don't want a cigarette tax increase because it's a tax increase, Judy Bartopinka, the Republican comptroller, said she's for it. So any idea? This is pure.
Topinka also had sort of a caveat. I'm for the cigarette tax increase as long as we put a casino in Chicago too.
Ah, okay. So anyway, where is, I mean, this is part of a package that as we are speaking here, the legislature is trying to fashion the budget and cut $2.7 billion from Medicaid and create a pension plan that rating agencies will look more favorably at without having all state employees retire tomorrow because they're scared of cuts in what they think they've had for their future pension benefits. Well, so how are we doing on any of this?
Well, I'm not impressed with the arguments of those who are opposed to the cigarette tax increase and say, well, we ought to be doing this with cuts. Now, I'd be more impressed if they were specifying where they would cut in Medicaid, and that hasn't been forthcoming. The Republicans who have opposed the cigarette tax increase, and I think the opposition is strongest in the Senate Republican caucus, also are not enamored by deep cuts to providers like hospitals. So where would they cut? I don't think we've heard. We've heard that they want.
Well, a lot of people talk about managed care and more preventative care and stuff like that.
That may save some money, but it isn't going to get.
Oh, and avoiding and fraud. I mean, there's a lot of talk about fraud. Make sure that people
and
are
in
on
some
the system.
states, the per capita cost for managed care clients is higher than our cost for our clients here in Illinois.
So you're saying this is not the silver bullet?
Yeah, it's not the silver bullet. I know this is one of the arguments that's made. That plus eliminating those millions of people who are illegally on the rolls, you know, the old welfare mom, now the welfare mom goes to the clinic kind of thing. And I think those are arguments given by people who, for political reasons, don't want to vote for anything.
I think there ought to be a tightening up on eligibility, but it's not going to bring in the dollars that they advertise. And I think we ought to look at managed care and other ways where we try to make the system more effective. But using those kind of things as an argument for not going along with the cigarette tax increase or not laying out more specific cuts, I think is, as I say, it's not very impressive.
Well, there are difficult choices out there, all in all. I just want to talk about pensions a little bit because, you know, not only is our governor, who is a Democrat, Pat Quinn, and elected, you know, making certain promises to unions. Now the unions are all mad at him because he wants to cut some benefits, or at least future benefits, and maybe benefits for current employees. They've already passed a bill this year to make retirees who had 20 years and were supposed to get free health care forever pay something that the Department of Central Management Services will decide. Mayor Emanuel from Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, visited the legislature a couple weeks ago, talked about, you know, they need pension reform too, and municipal pensions. Several mayors were at the Illinois Municipal League having a news conference just this last week saying, don't cut the money that, you know, we are supposed to have coming to us, and do something about police and fire pensions, which are the legislature has granted and are so generous, and yet we have to pay the cost, and you set the rules, and that's not fair to us over time because it's not sustainable for a number of years. Difficult choices. Are we going to see real pain, blood on the floor by the end of the legislative session?
I think there'll be some, there'll be some people who wind up suffering because of what the General Assembly will do. I don't think necessarily in the pensions, because the kind of things that Quinn's talking about, I think ultimately a court will say, no, you can't do that because of the guarantee that's in the Constitution. Now, Quinn's argument is, well, this will be a free choice because either you accept fewer benefits or we won't provide any health insurance for you. I'm not sure if a court would interpret that as being a free choice, or if the court would interpret it more as, I put a gun to Mike's head and say, give me your wallet and I won't shoot you, and Mike chooses to give me his wallet. So I think that would be the argument against this whole notion. But I think in Medicaid there are going to be cuts made, and as I said earlier, it's going to wind up, God forbid, but it may wind up with people losing care that's necessary to keep them alive.
I think there are serious constitutional questions.
Because the Constitution basically guarantees if you have a pension benefit,
well,
yeah, it says it's a contractual relationship, and it's not just state employees, it's any public employee has a contractual relationship in the retirement system, and the benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired, I believe is the actual language.
Well, yeah, and as I say, I think there'll be serious constitutional questions. There are challenges to any kind of meaningful changes, or I shouldn't say any kind, but I would say those that would
save
really
save a lot of money over a long period of time.
But I don't think we should lose sight of the overall situation here, and that is we are in a heck of a mess in terms of these pensions, and We've got bondholders and rating houses who are concerned over it. And so, and we can point to the past all we want and talk about what didn't happen and that the retirees paid their fair share
And the state
did
right.
not. We can talk about that, but it doesn't solve the problem. And I think whether you're talking about pensions, Medicaid, any of these mega issues, we've got to deal with them meaningfully. You know, there's a lot of talk here about pain, and that should not be taken lightly. But we're all going to have to sacrifice here some way.
And I think we should all be glad we're not in the legislature, because the votes will not be simple. Before, we're almost out of time, but I did want to mention that Rodney Davis was picked by Republican county chairman from the new 13th Congressional District, which includes much of Springfield, to replace Tim Johnson on the ballot. He's the Republican candidate for the U.S. House. David Gill is the very progressive / liberal Democratic physician from Bloomington who is the Democratic nominee. Rodney Davis is an aide to John Shimkus, congressman. He's a longtime aide to him. He's also helped the state party raise money, state Republican Party. And it turns out, from what we've learned, it was a very close vote. Erica Harold, former 2003 Miss America, was a close second during much of that meeting. She's originally from Urbana and is a lawyer in Chicago. So Rodney Davis versus David Gill, interesting race in about 10 seconds.
An interesting race. I think you covered it well, both on the program and in the newspaper.
Well, thank you much. I appreciate it. It's been an interesting ride, and we thought after the primary that was done, but congratulations to Rodney Davis, and as I said in the paper, let the battle be joined with David Gill. It'll be a very interesting and philosophically polarized race because those two folks really have different views of things. With that, I think we're out of time. Mike Lawrence and Charlie Wheeler, thanks for being here. Thank you for watching. I'm Bernard Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.